whatever we discuss, we always need to be fully aware that Greece's solution needs to be found within the European Union and within the euro. Now, let me conclude, because I see you looking at me rather ominous, by making a point about the Eurozone. And I will actually quote from the same article that you actually quoted, Paul Krugman actually writing yesterday, being very, very pessimistic about the future of the Eurozone, that the Euro system was designed to fight the last economic war. It is a Maginot Line built to prevent a replay of the 1970s, i.e. a crisis with very high inflation and low growth, rather than a defense mechanism to prevent a crisis similar to the crisis of the 30s, which was a very, very deep depression. There are many people who believe that unless Europe decides to print money, to put it very bluntly, and unless Germany overcomes its Weimar historical fixations with the history of overinflation, that there is no obvious solution to the Eurozone crisis. Without commenting on this, I'm sure that our distinguished economists on the panel would maybe care to make some comments, but it is very clear that the solutions that need to be adopted to solve the European crisis need to be much bolder than the ones we've seen so far. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mitsotakis. I hope there won't be a blitzkrieg this time against the Maginot Line. And now I would like to call upon Professor Pagoulatos. Professor Pagoulatos is at the Athens University of Economics and Business, Professor of European Politics and Economy, holds a doctorate from the University of Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar, and he has also been a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University.
Thank you very much, Albert. It's a great honor to be here, great pleasure. I think it is important, I share almost everything that Kyriakos said. It is important to understand where we are coming from in order to understand where we may be going. It seems to me that what we have today is the result of two crises which sort of met in a sort of what I've called in the restart the perfect storm. And one crisis is what occurred within the Eurozone as a result of largely architectural failures of the Eurozone, but also policy failures. They were the result of the fiscal rules lacking teeth, not being enforced, good times not being used in order to reduce the debt. And Greece was a very typical case of that. We had one of the largest growth rates in the Eurozone in the last 10, 15 years, and yet our public debt to GDP ratio remained almost unaltered, with the exception of a small improvement in the late 90s in the process of entering the Euro. And then sort of the moral hazard situation of being inside the Eurozone started taking a toll. And very importantly, that macroeconomic imbalances were ignored. The whole Eurozone construction was about public sector deficits, quite rightfully so, but it forgot completely about private sector deficits and current account deficits. It was about public debt. It even forgot that the whole fiscal criteria was about sustainability and not deficits in the short term, in the short run. And it forgot about sustainability, and it especially forgot the imbalances that can result from private sector indebtedness. And if the Greek case, the Greek crisis is a result of a huge public debt having gone out of control as a result of a recession and the lending crisis, the problems of Ireland and Spain have originated from the private sector and the real estate bubble and financial bubble, which the Eurozone structure was not capable of preventing. And it was a lot about price stability, quite rightfully so, I would say. This is the institutional mandate of the ECB, but it forgot completely about financial instability and what can come out of that. So we need very serious institutional reforms within the Eurozone, and we are seeing many of them, and that is the positive side. The negative side is that we're probably not seeing enough. And what has passed recently, the so-called six-pack legislative set of reforms are very important in correcting some of these imbalances, but it remains an open question what degree of coordination we will be seeing in terms of macroeconomic policies, not just fiscal policies, but also wage policies. We have had problems of wage policies in the country, be they deflationary or inflationary, having an impact on the rest. And Germany's wage deflation had an impact on the competitiveness of the South in the same way that the rise of unit labor costs in the periphery completely undercut its competitiveness. Without coordination, serious coordination, amounting even to a gouvernance économique, we cannot really talk about economic sustainability of the Eurozone on the longer run, and we cannot talk about the E in front of the EMU. And we have not done enough for this E in front of the M in the EMU. Now, this was the European storm. And this storm met with the Greek storm. And this was a storm that had to do with long-standing imbalances and policy failures. I already mentioned the problem with public debt. Greece, at the moment when the crisis occurred, had a huge public deficit problem and a huge current account deficit problem. And within the euro, Greece was part of the imbalances that developed within the eurozone, and it was the worst case of all kinds of failures, both the fiscal failure and the private deficit and the current account deficit failure. Greece's current account deficit was above 11% in 2009. It was 14, if I remember, it was 14% in 2009. This is huge. And what happened was that under the euro, the surplus countries increased their exports to the south. These exports were financed by cheap credit. The credit growth rates in the south were large. In some countries, this was translated into private debt. In Greece, it was mostly translated into public debt, taking the public debt out of control. And the result of that was a huge growth of foreign indebtedness. 2 years ago, I think in 2009, the Greek net foreign debt was 90%. This is huge, net foreign debt. Now, all this means that we have to restore competitiveness and to reduce the external deficits and the trade deficits at a very fast pace. We do not have the exchange rate instrument, thank God I will say, and I hope we do not acquire that, but this means that this adjustment has to take place through the real economy by way of what has been called, perhaps euphemistically, internal devaluation. Some would call it deflation, but this is the only instrument we have, combined with structural reforms. Now, these are painful reforms. They take a lot of time. We are facing a long period of slow growth, recession, unemployment for these structural adjustments to take place, for this huge deleveraging of the Greek economy to take place. Now, this will be happening in the public sector, it already is, but it is also affecting the private sector inevitably, because a large part of this bubble has to be taken off the Greek economy. The big question is whether in the day after that we will be left in a situation where our exports will be able to lead the growth out of this recession. It is not a fortunate event that the global economy growth rates are stagnant, because this undercuts the export-led growth effort of the entire periphery. Even Ireland is not growing out of its exports to the extent that it could, let alone Greece, which has all these problems. But this is really the only avenue forward. And it is an avenue, and this is perhaps, it's not the economic cost of it that really concerns me, because after all, this could be absorbed. We are in an economy that is still running a large informal sector. Incomes have been built in the past, quite significant. We have one of the highest rates of home ownership in Europe. We have extensive family networks that tend to support the unemployment, provide a sort of informal unemployment insurance. We have all these structures, which in some cases are elements of parochialism, but they may help cushion some of the effects of the recession and the crisis. The big problem is the social political implication with that. And what worries me the most is a rampant anti-Europeanism, which I see, in the extremes of society, and it seems that these extremes are sort of spreading towards the mainstream. They're infecting our political system, even in the mainstream party system, and this is probably the most worrying aspect that we will be facing in the future, how to manage this economic adjustment under the Eurozone, within the Eurozone, with the minimum possible cost in terms of the country's vocation within the European Union. I don't know if my time is over, but let me just add 3 words. How do you exit a debt crisis? 4 ways you can do it. Through faster growth rates. Can Europe achieve these now? Probably not. It's not a kind of a post-war type economy. It's a service economy. It's an aging economy. We'll be cleaning up the environment, so we won't be expecting too much from that. The second way, through fiscal consolidation. How much can you implement fiscal consolidation when the economy is stagnant? Not very much again. And it will not go down very well politically. The third way, through inflation. I think, and I fully agree with Kyriakos, that the ECB should be reconsidering its mandate. There is a very strong folk memory of hyperinflation within the German public. A new folk memory will be rising in Europe, a memory of depression. And I think we have to move from fair weather economics, of price stability and balanced budgets, to depression economics and managing depression economics, going back to Keynes and the instruments he offers. Clearly, these instruments cannot be applied at a national level. It's completely erroneous to believe that Greece can apply a national policy, sort of a stimulus for one country, Keynesian exit out of recession, but they must be applied at the European level. We should be seeing more stimulus in the north, and we should be seeing more stimulus in the US in order to help the global economy move out of stagnation. The fourth way out, and I finish with that, is financial repression. There's a recent paper by Rogoff and Reinhardt that if you exhaust these 3 instruments, or in combination with these other 3, you also have to apply some sort of taxation to the global financial system. We see some of that in terms of financial transaction tax, and I think we should be seeing more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for your presentation. And I must remind you that to confirm your point that Japan, the US, and the UK have high debts, but have very low spreads.
Yeah.
And that is a point that needs to be remembered, but applied to the European level. Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, I would like to call upon Mr. Papadopoulos, Mr. Kleon Papadopoulos, who is the Executive Chairman of TT Hellenic Postbank. Mr. Papadopoulos is a graduate of the University of Bristol, the London School of Economics, and an MBA holder from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Mr. Papadopoulos.
Thank you, Professor. I totally agree with the recommendations of George. And I'm not going to discuss what's going to happen tomorrow because, like we say in Greece, Kodos Psalmos Alleluia, it's going to happen tomorrow. There's no point about that. I'm just going to give you a different tack to the whole situation. I would also like to recommend Michael Lewis's book, Boomerang, and also the one before that, The Big Short, and of course, the first book he wrote was Liar's Poker. Michael, we started in the financial industry at the same time. He used to be a trader at Salomon's before he became a writer. And one of the things that he says in his books is that, well, at least in Boomerang, is that it's not really a Greek problem. It's a global problem. If you look at the global debt levels in the past decade, they've skyrocketed through the roof. And the last chapter of his book describes the situation in California. And from anecdotal evidence, it's a lot worse than it is in Greece right now. However, here in Greece, we have a tendency to look at things very Greco-centric. And we tend to forget that this is not a Greek problem, it's a global problem. And if I have to make one criticism, Nick Urialis told me that there are not going to be any journalists here, so I can be as controversial as I like. one of the criticisms that I can make is that the political personnel in this country that handled the crisis failed us in that they managed to make the problem a Greek problem.